So thank you for having me. My name is Veronica. I'm with the Warehouse Worker Resource Center, and I'm here to talk about the impacts of insecure working relationships on individuals and their communities. And also, I want to talk about the limitations and problems of the occupational health system from the perspective of worker advocates. Oh God, I'm supposed to do this too. So first about us, we're a nonprofit organization, a 501c3. The Warehouse Worker Resource Center was initiated to address the day-to-day grievances that the warehouse worker community faces in the IE. And we do that through education, advocacy, and action. So a little bit about the logistics industry. The Southern California, or the IE's logistics industry, is the largest concentration of warehouses in the country. It employs about 100,000 workers here in the IE. And so how you're related to this industry is that the majority of the goods that you have with you today, these workers likely moved. So what you're wearing or what you'd use, the shampoo that you use to wash your hair, these workers likely moved. So we're all connected to this industry. But also, the air that you're breathing right now, right here, that you don't get to strike from, is produced by this industry. And so I want to talk a little bit about what this population of workers, who they are. So I'll give a little composite of a story. I want to talk about a worker, an immigrant worker. His name is, we'll call him Javier, temp worker. He has been hardworking for a warehouse here in the IE. He's moving up the ranks. He's a low-level supervisor. He's now considered a lead, maybe gets 50 cents extra. The majority of these workers are minimum wage earners. And one day, as he's inside of a corrugated steel container with a piece of protruding metal, he gouges out the retina of his eye. He doesn't know it at the time, but he calls out for help. No one comes to his aid. The supervisor eventually says, well, if you need to go home, go home. He obviously can't drive, so he calls his wife. His wife comes for him, takes him to the emergency room. He's scared, he's in pain, he doesn't know what his rights are, and the emergency room notifies him, you need emergency surgery. We need to reattach the retina of your eye. The employer shows up to the emergency room because he calls him and says, hey, I need emergency surgery, this happened at work. The employer shows up to argue with the physician to dissuade him about the surgery that Javier needs. Javier doesn't have the over $10,000 to pay for this surgery, so he ends up going home. This leads to depression. This leads to Javier not knowing how he's gonna supply for his family, how he's gonna feed his family, and that's how we meet him. So what's a worker to do in this situation? He has no health insurance. The employers are so irresponsible that they are not only not providing the health insurance that they need to be providing to their workers, but they're also not providing their legal responsibility to workers by providing him with the workers' compensation that he should be entitled to because he was injured on the job. Additional limitations are that individual practitioners don't tend to practice occupational medicine. There is a very limited amount of physicians that practice occupational medicine. So this leads to our community having to seek out care from either inadequate urgent care facilities or the emergency rooms, which is not comprehensive health care. So these are the workers that actually make it. These are the workers that actually made it to a physician. And there is tons of workers that never make it. And this leads to workers seeking care through other means, through alternative forms of medicine, through self-care means. And oftentimes when this is inadequate, it leads to some type of substance abuse to cope with the situation that they're now in. So everything that's been talked about earlier that leads to the path of substance abuse, incarceration, labor is also where it starts. So is the system failing? That actually had to say, is the system failing? Sorry. So my question to you guys, is the system failing? Is capitalism failing? Capitalism that puts profits over human beings, always, that creates desperate and a scared society that operates from the scarcity framework, where workers are often competing against each other to secure employment, to be able to provide these shitty-ass wages that don't afford enough money to provide for their families, creates precarious working relationships, and we normalize that, and we cover that with the titles of entrepreneurship or the gig economy, which leads to employment conditions that exacerbate individual health at every level. This is on an individual level. We're not even addressing the family or the community impacts, which leads to labor enforcement agencies that are inefficient at best, overworked, undermanaged, without the resources to provide for adequate enforcement mechanisms to hold these employers accountable, which leads to the stratification of the medical services that these workers are supposed to be receiving, which weakens access and limits the comprehensive care that every person is entitled to have, which leads to an occupational medical field that is run by industry. So I'll ask again, is the system failing? No, it's not. It's working exactly as it's intended to work. The system is not failing at all. This is what it was designed to do, and it's working exactly right. But it is failing someone. It's failing our individual workers. It's failing our families. It's failing our communities. So what can you guys do about it So what can you guys do about this? So we encourage you to dig deep for the root causes of what is causing these conditions. We created a series of questions, an intake guide, if you will, that has helped us at the Resource Center to dig for what the root causes of injuries and illnesses that our communities are developing. One of the questions that I always ask workers when they come through our door is, did you have your break today? Did you eat lunch today? Were you given your lunch break today? Did you use the restroom? Did you drink water today? Oftentimes, as physicians are trained to treat the illness or injury before them. So if a worker comes in for kidney failure, the doctor, of course, wants to treat the kidney failure. But at no point, oftentimes, is the worker asked, why are your kidneys failures? Is it related to your work environment? Have you denied your body for the last 3 years of using the restroom because you're so afraid to use the restroom because you're on a quota, and if you don't perform to the standards of that quota, you risk losing your job? So I ask you guys to dig deep. Another magic question that we usually ask is, if you had a magic wand, what would you change about your work environment? This question is often telling, and it helps lead to us understanding what is on the worker's mind. We also encourage you to be bold and to dare to name the culprit. As physicians, you have a capital in your title, and that needs to be used to change the system that we live in. You need to be able to say, if the system is at fault for creating the conditions for the person being before you that day, then the system is failing. The working environment, the conditions, the system in its entirety is partially responsible. And this is very important, especially for someone that's looking to get care. We ask you also to support nonprofit organizations such as mine that deal with this on a day-to-day basis. Help us retrain and re-educate our community to stop detaching their bodies from themselves, who think they can use their bodies as machines that can be exploited for 8, 10, 12 hours every day without consequences. Hypertension, stress, all of that results from something. If you don't have enough money to take home to feed your kids, it's gonna result in things like hypertension and stress. And lastly, we ask you to support us in backing strong policies. With us today is Tim Shaddix, a staff attorney with WorkSafe, who supports us in developing strong policies that are aimed to protect workers. We do not think that policies are a silver bullet to changing the situation. We know that workers in action are going to change the situations and the conditions that they're exposed to. But we also understand that policies are a tool for us to make those changes a reality. So in closing, I'll leave you with this. I call on you as health providers to stand with us to properly diagnose, treat, and advocate for exposed and vulnerable and injured workers, and to put your names on the line like they put their lives on the line every day. Thank you.